We are joined now by the guru of the transfer portal, Pete Nakos. And Pete, this is how fast the world changes. So we talked to you on Thursday. Alabama had not made a hire yet. So the last we'd seen of Will Rogers at that point was I was shooting video of him throwing to Dylan Johnson on the sideline of the national championship game in a Washington jersey. And now Will Rogers is back in the portal because Kalen DeBoer is not the Washington coach anymore.
That's college football in a nutshell, I guess.
It's crazy. You got that. Now there's a QB1 opening at Michigan, which, I don't know. Is that the sort of thing that would bring people into the portal? That being an opening.
See, it's part of me says that we'll see some movement with the Alabama, Washington, and does Jim Harbaugh leave? You could definitely see some movement there. But I don't know. My gut kind of says that Michigan might not have a quarterback until the spring transfer portal window. I guess that's just how things operate. And man, just a lot of movement in the last, 72 hours now in college football.
Now's your chance, Alex Orji. So I don't mean to transfer. I mean to win the job and stay where you are. But Pete, one of the names that we've talked about this entire transfer portal window is Cam Ward. And January 1st, he says he's going to the NFL. January 13th, nope, I'm going to Miami. So what changed there?
I think Miami did a really good job of staying in his ear and trying to recruit him the last few weeks. And Cam was training for the NFL in Florida. And I also think that I think he spent a couple weeks evaluating the NFL and college a little bit more. And I think that he realized returning to college and going to Miami would only boost his draft stock. And obviously this year's class is uber talented, especially with today's news that JJ McCarthy going in.
Yeah. And all of these things affect the other things too, because that's also a piece of news that maybe Cam Ward was expecting when he committed to Miami, because I think back to JJ, but before the Rose Bowl, he did sound like a guy who was ready to go to the NFL. But then you watched him play in the Rose Bowl, in the national title game. Okay, another year, it could be helpful for him. But yeah, now this opens up that spot. But you mentioned the spring transfer portal window. How do you evaluate it if you're a player and your window's just closed, but there may be something out there for you in the spring? You just go through spring practice, try your best to win the job you can win, and then figure it out afterward?
Yeah, I mean, just talking to some sources too, right? We saw it last year, the spring game is the perfect opportunity to ball out and only help your stock in the portal. And just talking to some sources and stuff, I think a lot of teams expect the spring portal to be almost even crazier, just because so many programs know that they're going to need a couple of pieces to feel good entering the fall. And it's just, I expect that 2-week period in the spring to be nuts.
So interestingly enough, there's a rule in the SEC that says if you don't transfer within the winter portal, if you don't enter your name into the portal, you can transfer whenever, but if you don't enter your name in during the winter portal, you can't play for another SEC team the following season. So unless they change that, it would mean if you haven't, if the Alabama portal closes and none of these players other than Isaiah Bond enter, they're not leaving for another SEC team. They would have to figure it out in the spring. Do you think, because I know the SEC kicked around repealing that last year, and the thought among coaches I talked to and the administrators I talked to was that it actually calms things down for them. And they felt like, okay, we're not going to get sued because you can transfer anywhere else and everybody else can transfer. So they don't feel like they're going to get sued over it. So they're like, well, let's just make our lives easier and keep it. But I do wonder if now maybe they some of the ones that want players might want it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think traditionally it made a lot of sense, but with the way the college football calendar now works, I almost wonder if it needs to open in the spring. Because I do think you put a lot of pressure on these athletes to make a decision on their future during bowl season or during the college football playoff or even you're taking classes and your coach just left. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot for an athlete to evaluate, and I could see the SEC maybe doubling back and making some changes to that. And you mentioned schools being sued and stuff, with the environment of college sports in the NCAA right now. I could definitely see a lawsuit happening in the spring.
Yeah, and that's what their thought was. They're protected because you can still transfer somewhere else if you want to, just not to another SEC school. But yeah, as litigation averse as everybody's getting, it might open it back up, which would get wild too, because that was the thought when Travaris Robinson gets the job at Georgia. For those who don't know, he was Alabama's defensive backs coach. He gets hired by Georgia. He was a very good recruiter. He helped recruit a lot of Alabama's players. The thought was, oh, they're all going to jump in the portal. But when Nick Saban announced his retirement, a lot of them had already attended class for the spring semester.
Yeah.
Which means they can't go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the drop date at Alabama is the 17th. That's 3 days away. I mean, it's quite the decision to try to make. And obviously, all these athletes are going to have to move fast to be on campus somewhere else for spring ball.
Now, Isaiah Bond did this. So Isaiah Bond, the hero of the Iron Bowl, catches the 4th and 31 pass and was great in the SEC championship game too. He is already said he's going to Texas. And that's amazing. Does this feel like AD Mitchell going from Georgia to Texas? Like the SEC champ, one of their better receivers, is like, okay, going to Texas now.
Yeah, it definitely does feel like that. And he spoke with ESPN and he called it a business decision. And I mean, I couldn't agree more, right? I mean, his head coach retires. That's not on him. That's not on Nick Saban. Things just play out the way they do. And he's obviously trying to boost his draft stock and have a successful 2024. And I mean, I don't blame someone like Isaiah Bond for making the decision which he thinks is going to be best for his family and his future.
Well, and if you're Kalen DeBoer, it means you got to work fast. Now, like with Isaiah Bond, I'd probably point to Roma Dunze and Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk and be like, hey, you can do pretty well in my offense as a receiver. But yeah. I can understand where the known may beat the unknown at this point. And how hard does Kalen DeBoer have to work these first few days to make sure that roster holds together?
I mean, if I'm Kalen DeBoer, I mean, the first 48 hours, first 24 hours, I have to have one-on-one conversations with everyone, but especially Caleb Downs, Jalen Milroe, Tyler Booker, Caden Proctor. I mean, so many talented players on that Alabama roster that he needs to lock down if he's going to pick right up where Nick Saban left off.
Yeah. And we mentioned Will Howard, who was going to play for Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb. Grubb's not going to be the head coach at Washington. I think it's a fairly safe assumption he's coming to Tuscaloosa to be with Kalen DeBoer. Do you think you see Will Rogers head to Tuscaloosa, which would be crazy? He'd be going from moving across the country to moving 90 minutes from where you've been in Starkville.
You know, I spoke with someone in Will Rogers' camp this afternoon, and they really wanted to emphasize that every option is still on the table for Will. Now, what that is exactly, I think we'll find out as the days go on. I think staying at Washington is still definitely on the table, depending who they bring in as a head coach. And he's someone, right, who transferred and started classes, and it was brand new, and then all of a sudden he has to reassess what's going on. There's definitely, I mean, we just talked about this earlier, but there's also some quarterback openings across the country. Does he go to a Michigan? Does Auburn still want a quarterback? I mean, all intriguing options, which I'm sure that he's going to evaluate. But yeah, I definitely, talking to that source, there's some confidence that if Washington makes a hire who likes Will Rogers, that maybe Washington is still an option.
Well, and Auburn's an interesting one too, because it felt like before the bowl game, they kind of gave a vote of confidence to Peyton Thorne, and then the bowl game happens, and it's like, oh, okay, let's reevaluate here. Now you've got Hugh Freeze; he's going to call the plays. They've had some movement on their staff, and they're going to shake things up there. Can you see them shopping post spring for a quarterback if they don't get one now?
I definitely could, and not trying to take a shot at Peyton Thorne at all, but I mean, it says a lot about Hugh Freeze if he went after Cam Ward in the final hour, and then all of a sudden, I mean, they obviously missed out on Cam Ward, but you would have to think that they're going to try to add a quarterback one way or the other. And the one thing with Auburn to watch is they're not going to take a quarterback with like 3 years of eligibility left. There's Walker White, the freshman coming in, who's really highly touted and really highly thought of, and they want him to be the guy in the years to come. So definitely looking for a 1-year stop at whoever they would take.
Well, and there could be quite a few of those options out there in the spring. And it's amazing because so when do the Alabama and Washington portals close?
I did the math. Yeah, I think it's like around the February 10th date, give or take.
Okay.
30 days, right? So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of time, but I kind of expect everyone to like enter the portal in the next 10 days or so.
And then we may have another school in a power
Yeah.
conference, depending on who Washington hires.
That, and then I mean, let's just be
And
honest here.
Michigan.
And if Jim
Yeah.
Harbaugh leaves, I mean,
Yeah.
now we're gonna have the transfer portal until March at that point if it's a 2-week process for Jim Harbaugh.
Well, and this might be a better question for our friends at the Wolverine, but I'm curious from your standpoint as someone who covers the portal. Would it behoove Michigan if Jim Harbaugh decides to take an NFL job to very quickly promote Sharon Moore to ensure the roster stays together?
Yeah, the part of the calendar year we're at does not really help Michigan, especially if they do have an exodus, right? And like 30 guys, 40 guys go in and they need to fill spots. So yeah, if I'm Michigan, I'm telling Jim Harbaugh, if you make a decision, just let us know because we're going to get Sharon Moore in your office as quickly as possible.
Yeah, because that's what the difference in this situation than maybe with whoever Washington hires. There are some A+++ players on Michigan's roster that I imagine everybody in the country would want. And it's not even a matter of questioning their loyalty to Michigan. It's a matter of the market's going to tell you, hey, there's a lot out there for you.
Yeah, I mean, look at what Deion Sanders did at Colorado, right? He built a roster through the transfer portal. Well, I'm sure if Deion was on the show right now, he would tell you that he couldn't build a roster in 2 weeks in the spring transfer portal window.
Yeah.
And I doubt Michigan would like to do that either.
No, and it's the same situation at Alabama. I mean, also a bunch of A++ former 5-star recruits, some really good players. So yeah, if you're Kalen DeBoer, you're just playing defense right now. But did you think it would stretch like this? Did you think
No?
Okay,
No,
that's what I was wondering because it felt like around New Year's Day or so that this was calming down, that everything was going to be cool. And it really feels like Nick Saban retiring just kicked it into high gear again.
I mean, Andy, I'll be honest with you. Last weekend, I felt like I caught my breath. And then Wednesday happened and Nick Saban retired. Which, I mean, someone can tell me they thought it was coming. I didn't think he was coming. I mean, you never think Nick Saban's going to retire until he actually does it. And he did it.
Yeah. And now, I mean, that's the thing that we hadn't really just envisioned, but just a roster full of 5-star recruits and open season. Like,
yeah, I mean, in recruiting too, right? Plenty of signees and stuff who either enroll early or are going to enroll this summer, who all of a sudden are going to reassess their futures.
Yeah, this is going to be a wild next few months. So we'll see what happens in Ann Arbor, because I think you're right. I think if Jim Harbaugh stays, it probably calms everything down, and then all you get is whatever happens with Washington hiring. There may be a little domino effect after that, but not huge. But yeah, if Michigan opens, Katie bar the door.
Yeah, it's gonna be craziness all over again, and then it'll be April before we know it.
Right, and that's the other part. Like, thank you, Jim Harbaugh, for moving spring practice, because you were going to have some teams starting your spring practice in about a month, and their spring practice is going to end, and you're going to kind of have an idea of who's in and who's out by that point.
Yep. Yeah.
So, well, I can't wait to figure out what happens next. We'll see with Will Rogers, Cam Ward. Now, Cam Ward is good at Miami, right? Like, that's
from my understanding, it's locked in and done.
Okay.
The NFL deadline's on the 15th, and he was going to play in the East-West Shrine Bowl, and that's been called off from my understanding. And yes, he's locked in at Miami.
Let me throw one other one at you. We haven't talked about this, and I didn't prep you for this.
Great.
Caleb Williams hasn't declared for the draft yet.
He has not.
He can't get in the portal.
Yes, he can. No, he can't.
After the spring, he can.
He can in the spring.
So he could just, if he wanted to, he can either go back and start at USC or say, I would sit out and I'm going to go somewhere else. And I'll be there after. So the 15th is the deadline. the 19th is when the NFL is going to release that list of everybody who declared. So either they're going to do it and announce it, or we'll find out on the 19th. But I still can't imagine any scenario where he does not declare for the draft. But this year's been so weird, Pete. Now I'm open to any possibility.
I don't know. Caleb Williams strikes me as the kind of guy who doesn't want to like make a huge deal out of it. So I won't be surprised if he doesn't announce and just pops up on the 19th on that list.
Yeah.
Or could you imagine if he?
No, it would be crazy. Can you imagine a Heisman Trophy winner essentially on the open market? Because obviously he could just stay at USC, and I'm sure Lincoln Riley would be cool with that. He plays very well for Lincoln Riley, so that would be fine. But in the ultimate just chaos scenario, yeah, he goes, I'm gonna sit spring practice. I'll be in the portal, and once I'm in, let me know.
Call your shot, Andy. Call your shot. Caleb Williams to Michigan with Sharon Moore as the head coach.
I still think he's more likely a whoever the Bears trade the number 1 pick to, or a Bear.
Yes,
one of the two. Yeah. So we'll find out, though. That's why I asked you this, Pete, because I feel like after the last week, you're open to any suggestion at this point.
I am very jaded, and I am open to anything. Yes. Yes.
All right. Pete Nakos, we'll talk to you again when the next bomb drops, the next Nakosification. We'll see ya.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.